crazy, lying witch. That's how President Donald Trump spat at Jasmine Crockett the moment she stepped into the hearing room. But this wasn't just another insult. It was the spark of a showdown watched by more than 50 million Americans, a clash where every word felt like a weapon. On one side, Trump, the 47th president, wielding arrogance, power, and a history of over 34 criminal charges. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, a relentless fighter for justice, standing against a storm of lies, racism, and intimidation. This was no debate. This was verbal warfare. Every shout, every sneer, every fact a strike that shook the chamber. And what unfolded in the next moments would expose not only Trump's fury, but America's deepest wounds. The gavel struck once. The room fell into a tense hush, cameras whirring, reporters holding their breath. Then came the fire. Jasmine Crockett didn't wait for ceremony, didn't bow to the theater of power. She leaned forward, eyes locked on Donald Trump, her voice sharp as steel. Mr. President, do you think the American people are blind to your lies? Or do you simply believe they're too afraid to hold you accountable? The words sliced through the chamber. Gasps erupted across the room, pens scratching furiously on notepads, every lens pivoting to catch Trump's reaction. Trump's lips curled into that trademark smirk, the smirk of a man who'd spent decades dodging responsibility. He let out a low laugh, mocking, cruel. Blind? No, Congresswoman. They see perfectly. What they see is a crazy lying witch desperate for attention. The chamber cracked with noise. Half the room recoiled, half leaned forward, hungry for blood. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She let his insult hang in the air like smoke, then cut through it with a stare so fierce it felt like a blade. Desperate for attention? Tell me, Mr. President, was it desperation when you told 153 documented lies while sitting in the Oval Office? Or was that just your version of leadership? The room erupted again, cameras flashing, whispers ricocheting off the marble walls. Trump's jaw tightened, the smirk faltering for just a heartbeat before he leaned into the microphone. You're quoting fake news. Numbers made up by people like you, people who hate this country and want to see it burn. Jasmine's laugh was cold, bitter. Fake news? These are your words, Mr. President, recorded, archived, repeated by your own mouth. Every word is a brick in the wall of corruption you built around yourself. The clash was electric, like lightning striking steel. Trump slammed a hand on the table, his ring clattering against the wood. You're nothing, Congresswoman, nothing but noise. Nobody cares what you say. But the reporters cared. The flashes didn't stop. The microphone stretched closer, the room feeding on every spit of venom, every razor-edged reply. Jasmine leaned back slightly, just enough to show she wasn't rattled. Her voice dropped, calm but deadly. If I'm nothing, then why are you sweating, Mr. President? The air froze. For a moment, even Trump was silent. His face flushed crimson, and the veins on his neck bulged. Then he roared back, voice booming like a cannon. Because this is a witch hunt. Because you and your kind want to destroy me. Destroy America. Destroy everything we built. Every camera caught it. Every reporter scribbled it down. The mighty President of the United States, cornered, rattled, furious. And Jasmine Crockett, unshaken, eyes steady, voice cutting deeper. Destroy America? No, Mr. President. I am here to save it. From you. The words echoed, bouncing across the chamber like thunder. The crowd stirred, some clapping quietly before being hushed by the gavel. This was not a hearing anymore. This was war. Trump sneered, leaning closer to his microphone, spitting each word like poison. You think you can save America? You're a joke, a pathetic clown playing hero in a circus no one believes. Jasmine's lips curled into a small, unyielding smile. Then let the circus play on, Mr. President, because today the truth will take center stage, and you will not leave unscarred. The tension snapped like a bowstring pulled too tight. The first round had landed, hard, and the room knew this battle would not end in polite handshakes or empty statements. It would end in wreckage. Flashbulbs continued to explode. Reporters whispered, some shaking their heads, others grinning like they'd just witnessed history. And as the gavel struck again, trying to restore order, The sound was drowned beneath the storm of two voices, one fueled by arrogance, the other by justice. Jasmine Crockett had come to fight. Donald Trump had come to dominate, and neither was willing to back down. This was only the beginning. And if you think that was intense, if you felt the heat in that chamber, the weight of every word, then you know this story is just getting started. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth stands tall, no matter how loud the lies. And just as the echoes of that first verbal strike began to fade, the storm only grew louder. The moderator tried to restore order, but order was dead. This was chaos, controlled by two voices locked in combat. Jasmine leaned forward again, refusing to let Trump's insults linger without an answer. You've called me every name in the book, Mr. President, but tell me, when history writes your name, what will it say? Liar, bully, or coward? Trump snapped back before she even finished. History will call me the greatest president this country has ever had. You, Jasmine Crockett, will be forgotten by tomorrow morning. The audience gasped, a low ripple across the chamber. Some laughed nervously, others shook their heads. Jasmine cut in, voice sharp, not letting him own the moment. Forgotten or remembered as the woman who stood against a man who thought power made him untouchable? Trump slammed his palm down on the table, cutting her off. You're not standing against me. You're standing against the people who put me here, against 74 million Americans who voted for me. You insult them every time you open your mouth. His words boomed like cannon fire. The crowd reacted instantly, reporters scribbling faster, cameras swiveling to capture every angle. But Jasmine didn't yield an inch. She leaned closer, her tone lower, colder. Don't hide behind numbers, Mr. President. Those 74 million didn't vote for corruption. They didn't vote for violence. They didn't vote for you to tear this country apart. Trump shot back, his voice dripping with venom. You think you know what Americans want? You represent nobody. You're a fraud, a mouthpiece for people who hate this nation. She fired back without hesitation. And you're a mouthpiece for fear, for racism, for the darkest corners of this country's past. The chamber erupted again. Gasps, whispers, even a few claps before the gavel pounded furiously. But it didn't matter. The dam had broken. They were no longer taking turns. They were cutting each other off, words clashing midair like blades. Trump shouted over her, "You're weak!" Jasmine shouted back, "You're terrified! Pathetic! Corrupt! Unfit! Unworthy!" The volley was relentless, each insult sharper than the last. Every syllable seemed to slice through the air, leaving the room raw and breathless. The moderator's voice cracked as he tried to intervene. "Order! Order! Please!" But no one listened. Not Trump, not Jasmine, not the crowd, who sat wide-eyed, transfixed by the spectacle. Trump leaned into his mic, his voice low and mocking. "You think you scare me? You think your little speeches mean anything? You're just a loudmouth who will be crushed under the weight of history." Jasmine's reply was immediate, cutting, merciless. "The only thing history will crush, Mr. President, is your legacy of lies. And it won't take centuries. It's happening right now, in front of millions." The chamber roared again. Some shouted in anger, some in awe, but no one could deny the electricity in the air. Trump raised his voice to drown hers out. "You're not strong. You're not smart. You're just noise. And noise fades." She hit back instantly, voice sharp as a blade's edge. "Noise may fade, but truth doesn't, and I am not leaving this room until every person here hears it." The clash had turned into a rhythm, a furious duet where every line was a dagger thrown. Neither paused. Neither surrendered the floor. Trump sneered, pointing a finger across the table. "You're a disgrace to Congress," Jasmine pointed right back. "And you're a disgrace to the presidency." The gavel struck again and again, but it was useless. The words had taken on a life of their own, spilling over the rules, drowning the chamber in fury. Every insult became a headline before it even left their lips. Every word a weapon, every sentence a spark. And through it all, the crowd leaned in further, unwilling to blink. They were watching not just a hearing, but a battle that carried the weight of America's soul. The fury, the venom, the clash of egos. It was no longer about questions and answers. It was survival. And as the shouting swelled, as the tension carved itself into the walls, one thing became clear. Neither Trump nor Jasmine would give an inch. Not today, not ever. This was a duel without surrender, and the world was hanging on every word. Then just when the clash reached its peak, Trump changed his footing. He leaned back in his chair, smirk painted across his face, voice oozing with arrogance. You know, Jasmine, this isn't the first time you've tried to make a name for yourself by attacking people above your league. The chamber shifted. The tension bent, but didn't break. Trump wasn't answering anymore. He was dodging, turning away from the question, steering the spotlight where he thought it would sting the most. Let's not forget, he continued, his tone dripping with mockery, you came from nothing, nothing, and now you sit there acting like you're the savior of America. Tell me, do you even remember the scandals in your own district? The headlines questioning your credibility? A low murmur rippled through the room. Reporters raised their heads. Cameras adjusted. The air itself seemed to tighten. But Jasmine didn't blink. She knew exactly what he was doing. Her reply was calm, sharp, deliberate. Mr. President, when you cannot answer a question, you reach for distractions. You call it scandal. I call it community work. You call it nothing. I call it rising despite every system that told me to sit down. I am not ashamed of my past. Are you ashamed of yours? The words sliced clean, no hesitation. Gasps filled the chamber. Trump waved his hand dismissively, scoffing. Spare us the sob story. You're here because you shout louder than everyone else. That's it. You don't have results. You don't have respect. You don't even have control over your own narrative. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked on him like a hunter on prey. My narrative, I don't need to control it, because facts control themselves. It's your story, Mr. President, that unravels the moment truth walks into the room. The audience murmured again, louder this time. Each exchange was cutting deeper, harder. Trump, visibly irritated, tried another swerve. You sit here lecturing me, but where were you when crime skyrocketed in your city? Where were you when your so-called leadership failed? You can't even run a district, and you think you can question me? He raised his hands dramatically, letting the insult hang in the air like smoke. But Jasmine was ready. I was there, she said, voice unwavering. On the ground, listening to the people who didn't have a voice, not hiding behind golf clubs and gold curtains, not tweeting rage at midnight. I was there. You were nowhere. The crowd reacted instantly, half gasped, half clapped before the gavel slammed down again. Trump's face reddened, his lips tightening as if holding back a roar. He tried to laugh, but it came out hollow, forced. Oh, please, don't pretend you're some hero. Everyone knows you've built your career by tearing others down. Just like now. Just like this pathetic performance. Jasmine's reply was swift, merciless. No, Mr. President, I built my career by standing when others were too afraid. And what you call a performance, millions of Americans call courage. The room exploded again. Journalists whispering furiously, flashes igniting the chamber like lightning. Trump leaned forward, jabbing a finger across the table. You're nothing but a fraud with a loud mouth. That's all you'll ever be. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her voice rose, steady as steel. Fraud is building empires on lies. Fraud is exploiting fear. Fraud is promising unity while sowing division. That fraud, Mr. President, sits right there in your chair. The words struck like thunder. For the first time, Trump's eyes darted sideways, as though searching for an escape hatch. He chuckled darkly, but his voice cracked at the edges. You think you've cornered me? I could run circles around you with one hand tied behind my back. Jasmine leaned in, quiet but lethal. Then why do you keep running in circles right now? The audience gasped so loudly it echoed through the walls. Trump's mouth opened, but no words came. For a moment, only the sound of the cameras clicking filled the silence. And then, with a sudden burst of anger, he slammed his hand down again. You don't deserve to sit at this table. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her voice calm, but cutting through the chaos like glass. I deserve to be here because truth deserves to be heard. And no matter how loud you shout, you cannot bury it. The chamber was electric, every breath pulled taut. Trump's deflections, his diversions, his attempts to twist the story, each one had been dismantled, stripped bare, and turned back on him. And as the tension mounted, it became clear. The man who once commanded rooms with fear was now cornered by nothing more than words. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Words had wounded him. Now she would deliver the strike he couldn't dodge. She reached beneath the desk, lifting a thick folder bound in black. The sound of it hitting the table echoed like a gavel of its own. "This," she said, her voice sharp as steel, "isn't opinion. This isn't rhetoric. This is evidence." Trump froze for half a second, his smirk faltering, eyes narrowing at the sight of the folder. "More theatrics," he sneered, but his voice had a quiver buried deep inside. Jasmine opened the folder with deliberate care. Pages fanned out across the table. Financial records, signed memos, photographs stamped with dates and times. Each sheet seemed to glow beneath the camera lights, ready to pierce the air like arrows. "Here," she said, holding up the first document, "a payment record tying your closest allies to illegal contracts." Gasps shot through the chamber. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Trump slammed his palm down. "Fake! All fake! You people have been after me for years. This is just another witch hunt." But Jasmine didn't pause. She lifted another paper, her voice unwavering. "And here, an email, dated and signed, proving you knew about it. Proving you weren't just a bystander, but the architect." The room exploded in murmurs. The moderator shouted for silence, but silence was gone. Trump shot to his feet, towering over the table, his face crimson. "Lies, all of it. You're making this up because you can't handle that I won, that I'm still standing while your side is crumbling." He jabbed his finger at her across the table, spit flying with each word. "You're disgusting. Disgusting to bring this garbage in here." But Jasmine didn't flinch. She laid the second paper flat, then reached for a photograph. The photo slid across the table toward Trump. A handshake. His, with a figure already convicted. Date stamped, clear as day. The chamber gasped so loudly it shook the air. Trump recoiled, his hand clenching into a fist. "That's doctored. Photoshop. Do you think the American people are stupid enough to fall for this?" But Jasmine's reply was deadly calm. "The American people can see with their own eyes. They don't need to be told what's in front of them. They know the difference between truth and spin." She raised the photo higher so the cameras could feast on it. The flashes were relentless, like lightning strikes capturing every angle of Trump's face, twisted with rage. He slammed both fists onto the table, the sound reverberating like thunder. "This is a setup, a disgrace. You're trying to overthrow the will of the people." The crowd inside the chamber couldn't hold back. Some stood shouting, "Shame!" Others yelled, "Finally!" The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the sound. Security moved closer, uneasy. The moderator's gavel pounded, useless against the chaos. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was louder than Trump's fury. "You can shout all you want, Mr. President, but shouting doesn't erase signatures. It doesn't erase photographs. It doesn't erase truth." Her words cut through the noise, a scalpel against a hurricane. Trump pointed wildly at her, voice cracking into a scream. "You're trying to destroy me. You hate me. You hate this country." Jasmine stood now, her posture steady, unshaken by his rage. "No, I love this country enough to confront its liars, its bullies, its frauds. And right now, Mr. President, that means confronting you." The chamber erupted again. Some people stood and cheered, others booed, the sound colliding into a storm of chaos. The cameras whirred, catching every second. Knowing this was history, Trump's face twisted, his voice desperate, clinging to the only weapon he had left, denial. "This means nothing, nothing. You'll see. The people are with me. They'll always be with me." But Jasmine's final line struck like a hammer. "The people aren't with lies. They're with justice. And tonight, justice is at this table." The chamber seemed to ignite. The noise, the flashes, the pounding. It was less a hearing now and more a battlefield. And in that battlefield, Trump's fury stood against Jasmine's unshakable calm. One thrashing, one standing, one collapsing under the weight of evidence, the other rising higher with every word. The duel had entered a new phase. Not just words, not just insults. Now it was paper, ink, proof. And no matter how loud Trump shouted, the document spoke louder. If you're watching this unfold and you believe truth must never bow to power, subscribe to Harrison Stories, where the lies break and the truth always rises. But Trump wasn't finished, not by a long shot. If evidence cornered him, he would claw his way out with venom. He leaned forward, both fists pressed hard against the table, his eyes burning with raw defiance. You think you're some kind of hero, Jasmine Crockett? You're nothing, a nobody, a useless little fraud who built her name on screaming in hearings like this. His voice dripped with contempt, every syllable sharpened into a blade. The audience gasped, a ripple of shock running through the chamber. Cameras zoomed in, lenses hungry for the raw heat of the insult. But Trump wasn't done. You call yourself a fighter for justice, but look at you. What have you ever achieved? Nothing. No great bills, no legacy, no respect. You're a parasite on this system, feeding off chaos because it's all you can do. Arrear. His words struck like hammer blows, meant to shatter her resolve. Reporters scribbled furiously, microphones catching every echo. Yet Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat still, back straight, her hands folded calmly in front of her. But her eyes were fire. Flickering, burning, narrowing like a predator's gaze, locking onto prey. Trump sensed it, but he doubled down, voice louder, harsher. You don't belong in this room. You don't belong in Congress. You don't belong in the same sentence as me. You're a mistake, a useless mistake. Gasps, murmurs. A few shouted, "Shame," from the back rows. But Trump relished the chaos, his grin wide as if cruelty itself gave him strength. Then Jasmine moved. Not a shout, not a dramatic rise, just a small lean forward, her voice low, steady, deadly calm. "Mr. President," she said, every word a dagger slipping between his ribs. When a man of power calls a woman useless, it usually means she's his greatest threat. The chamber froze. Every head turned, every breath held. Trump blinked, his grin faltering for just a heartbeat. Jasmine continued, her voice slow, precise. "You can throw insults at my career. You can mock my past, but every word you spit only proves one thing. You are terrified of me. Terrified of the truth I bring. Terrified that your empire of lies is crumbling in real time." The crowd roared. Cheers, claps, shouts of defiance mingling with jeers from Trump's supporters. The room shook under the noise. Trump slammed his fist again, roaring to drown her out. "I'm not terrified of you. You're pathetic. You're nothing but a sideshow." But Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She tilted her head slightly, eyes locked on his, the way a lioness studies prey before the kill. "Then why, Mr. President," she asked softly, "are you spending every second of this hearing attacking me instead of defending yourself?" The line detonated like a bomb. The audience exploded. Gasps, cheers, cries crashing together like thunder. Trump's jaw tightened, his hands shaking on the table. He tried to fire back, but the words tangled, his voice breaking. You're not worth. This whole thing is rigged." Jasmine cut him off, her tone sharpening, slicing through his unraveling. "Rigged? The only thing rigged here is your desperation. Every insult you hurl only digs you deeper. Every denial exposes the truth more clearly. You think calling me useless will erase your corruption?" She leaned in closer, eyes blazing. "You just made your biggest mistake, because I don't run from insults. I hunt them, and right now I'm hunting you." The chamber erupted. Reporters stood to catch every angle. Spectators shouted, some cheering wildly, others booing, but all unable to look away. Trump's face was crimson now, his body tense like a man cornered with no exit. He raised his hand as if to silence her, but she was already on the attack. "You wanted to make this personal? Fine. Then let's make it personal. You call me a mistake? History will call me the one who stood against you when no one else had the courage." The crowd was on its feet. The moderator pounded his gavel, but it was drowned in the storm. Jasmine didn't look away. Her voice, though calm, carried the raw power of inevitability. This isn't the story of a useless woman, Mr. President. It's the story of a corrupt man finally facing someone who won't back down. And for the first time all night, Trump looked like the hunted. But the hunter did not relent, and the hunted would not flee. The chamber was already a storm, but now it cracked open into chaos. Trump surged forward, gripping his microphone so hard the metal stand shook. "You don't get to lecture me, you pathetic fraud," he bellowed, his voice ripping through the chamber like thunder. Jasmine's mic trembled under the force of her reply. "You don't get to hide behind insults when the truth is staring you in the face?" Their words collided midair, exploding louder than the gavel that hammered in vain. "Order! Order!" the moderator cried, but his voice drowned in the tidal wave of rage. Trump jabbed a finger across the table, spit flying with each syllable. "You are a disgrace. You are weak, stupid, useless." Jasmine shot up from her chair, eyes blazing, voice shaking the walls. "And you are corrupt. You are cruel, cowardly, a danger to everything this country stands for." The microphones rattled as though they couldn't contain the fury pouring through them. The audience gasped, shouted, some covering their mouths, others on their feet, drawn into the firestorm. This wasn't politics anymore. This was raw, unfiltered war. Trump slammed his palm against the desk so hard the wood groaned. "I built this nation back from the ashes. I carried it on my back while people like you sat and whined." Jasmine leaned across the table, her voice cutting like glass. "You didn't build anything. You tore it apart. You divided, you poisoned, you broke the very soul of America." The moderator's gavel cracked against the block again and again. "Enough, enough." But his pleas were pebbles thrown into a hurricane. Trump's face twisted, red as flame, veins bulging at his neck. "You wouldn't last a single day in my shoes. Not one day. You don't have the strength." Jasmine roared back, her words molten. "Strength is not lying. Strength is not bullying. Strength is standing for justice even when it costs everything." The audience erupted, their shouts overlapping, clashing, feeding the storm. Some screamed, "Sit down," at Trump. Others cried, "Fight back, Jasmine." The chamber had become an arena. Every spectator pulled into the duel. Trump pointed at her again, his voice breaking into a scream. "You think you're tough? You're nothing without me. Nothing." Jasmine's reply was instant, her fury raw but steady. "Without you, Mr. President, this country breathes again. Without you, we are free." The crowd roared. Cameras snapped like machine gun fire. Trump tried to shout over it, his words tangling with rage. "You shut your mouth. I am the president. You don't get to talk to me like that." But Jasmine leaned closer, her face inches from the mic, voice sharp enough to cut steel. "Then act like one. Because right now, all I see is a man screaming to drown out his guilt." Gasps ripped through the chamber, louder than ever. Even the gavel froze midair. Trump's roar was primal, shaking the rafters. "You will regret this. You will pay for disrespecting me." Jasmine fired back, her voice unyielding, her fury forged into a blade. "The only regret I have is that it took this long to stand in front of you and say it to your face. You are unworthy of the power you've abused." Their words clashed, colliding with such force that even the microphones buzzed, straining to contain the fury. Trump shouted again, voice cracking into raw rage. "You're finished. Your career is over. You're done." Jasmine slammed her palm on the desk, her voice rising above the noise like a battle cry. "You can't finish me because I don't answer to you. I answer to the people, and they are done with you." The chamber exploded. Reporters on their feet, pens flying, cameras flooding the air with light. The crowd shouted, screamed, cried, the sound so deafening it rattled the chandeliers. The moderator's gavel pounded again, his voice desperate. "This is out of control. Sit down, sit down." But there was no sitting now. Not for Trump, not for Jasmine. They were standing, locked across the table, voices slamming against each other in a duel so fierce it felt like the walls might crack. Trump's voice grew hoarse, but he screamed anyway. "You're a joke." Jasmine's reply was sharp as fire. "And you're a nightmare." The clash burned hotter, fiercer, with no sign of ending. Every insult was fire. Every retort was gasoline. And the chamber was the blaze. At that moment, it wasn't a hearing. It wasn't politics. It was the sound of a nation's wounds ripping open, screamed through two voices refusing to yield. And as the storm reached its peak, one truth burned through the chaos. Neither Trump nor Jasmine would walk away from this night unchanged. But storms do not rage forever. And Jasmine Crockett knew it. Her chest still heaved, her blood still burned, but in that instant she saw the opening. The chamber was chaos, Trump red-faced and roaring, the moderator battered by futility, the audience torn between shock and frenzy. Jasmine raised her hand. Not a shout this time, not fury, just silence. And in that silence, something shifted. The crowd leaned in. The cameras refocused. The gavel froze midair. Even Trump faltered for half a breath, caught off guard by her sudden calm. Then Jasmine spoke. Her voice was low, steady, unbreakable. You scream because you're afraid of the facts, so let's put the facts on the table. Trump's eyes narrowed, but before he could interrupt, Jasmine pressed forward. Under your administration, she said, her voice carrying now, each word sharp as steel, 40 million Americans lost access to affordable health care. That's not a rumor. That's not gossip. That is the Congressional Budget Office's own analysis. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Trump slammed his hand down. Lies! All lies! But Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She cut through his bluster with the precision of a surgeon. 3 million jobs vanished in a single quarter. That's your Department of Labor report, not mine. The room stirred again, heads nodding, pens scratching. And when the pandemic came, while families begged for help, you bailed out corporations instead of people. You signed the checks. You watched the hospitals drown. The words landed like blows, but they were colder than fury, sharper than rage. Each one was fact. Each one was a chain wrapped tighter around Trump's throat. He tried to interject, jabbing his finger across the table. You don't understand the economy, but Jasmine cut him off, her voice unflinching. No, Mr. President, you don't understand accountability. You don't understand that leadership is not about blaming, not about bullying, not about hiding. It's about facing the truth head on. And every truth I've spoken tonight comes from your own records. The crowd erupted in applause, a thunderclap of sound that shook the chamber. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was judgment. Trump's face flushed deeper, crimson climbing his neck. He opened his mouth, but no words came, just air, heavy and ragged. Jasmine didn't stop. You call me weak, but weakness is avoiding the truth. You call me useless, but useless is having power and using it only to serve yourself. And you call yourself strong, but true strength doesn't fear questions. It welcomes them. Applause surged again, louder this time. People on their feet. Reporters nearly dropping their pens as they scrambled to capture every syllable. Trump's fist clenched, his jaw quivered. But the words he once commanded like weapons betrayed him now. Jasmine leaned closer, her voice quiet but amplified by the silence around her. You don't get to gaslight history. The numbers don't lie. The reports don't lie. The people who lived through it don't lie. The only lie here is the one you're shouting, hoping if it's loud enough, it will erase the truth. The crowd roared, their applause swelling like a wave crashing over the chamber. Trump tried again, sputtering, his words fractured. That's not, But the power had shifted. The predator was cornered. The hunter had become prey again. And Jasmine did not let up. You've called yourself a businessman, but your businesses filed bankruptcy 6 times. You called yourself a patriot, but you mocked veterans who gave their lives. You called yourself a leader, but you incited chaos and left ashes where there should have been unity. Gasps. Applause. The chamber was alive, electric, vibrating with the force of her words. Trump shook his head violently, his voice cracking into desperation. Fake! Fake news! All fake! But his tone betrayed him. The roar was gone. The certainty was gone. Jasmine's eyes burned, but her tone stayed calm, relentless. You can scream fake all you want, but you can't erase your signature on those orders. You can't erase the footage of your words, and you can't erase the pain of millions who lived through it. The audience thundered to its feet. Applause pounded like a heartbeat, drowning out Trump's sputters. He sat, shoulders heaving, face a mask of fury and helplessness. And beside him, Jasmine stood tall, unshaken, her words ringing like a verdict. This isn't about me. This isn't about you. This is about truth. And the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard. The ovation shook the walls. The moderator, exhausted, didn't bother with the gavel. He knew the hearing had transformed into something far larger. And in the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, calm in the storm she had mastered, while Donald Trump burned red under the weight of every word he could not outrun. But Donald J. Trump had never been a man who accepted defeat. Not in business, not in politics, and certainly not in front of cameras. He leaned back, sucking in breath, his jaw tight, eyes narrowing like a predator circling for another strike. Then he smiled. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't confidence. It was the grin of a man who had prepared for this very moment. Trump leaned forward, his voice cutting through the chamber with eerie calm. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard her little speech. Very dramatic, very emotional. But you don't know the whole story, do you? The room hushed. He motioned to one of his aides, who rushed forward, clutching a thick folder. Papers, highlighted passages, photographs clipped to the edges. Trump snatched the bundle, slapped it onto the desk, and spread the pages like a magician, revealing his final trick. Here's the truth about Jasmine Crockett, he barked. She talks about honesty. She talks about integrity. But right here, ladies and gentlemen, we have proof she's been hiding her own corruption, campaign funds misused, deals made under the table, lies, all lies, her lies. Gasps ricocheted around the chamber. Reporters leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. The shift was immediate. Where moments before Jasmine commanded the floor, suddenly the spotlight burned against her. Trump's voice rose with every sentence, his rhythm intoxicating, drawing the audience into his fiction. She calls me a liar, but here it is. Signed checks, suspicious transfers, secret meetings with lobbyists. I told you, she's no hero. She's just another fraud. Worse than me, maybe. He slapped the papers again, the sound cracking through the silence. You see this? This is the real Jasmine Crockett, and I won't let America be fooled. The audience broke into a frenzy, half gasped in disbelief, half jeered, their voices colliding with flashes from cameras. And for the first time that night, Jasmine didn't speak immediately. Not because she was cornered, but because she understood the gravity of the trap. Trump saw her pause and pounced, pounding the table with his fist. Quiet now? Nothing to say? You can't shout down the truth, Jasmine. You can't bully your way out of facts. The chamber tilted, the momentum twisting like a knife. Even the moderator leaned forward, uncertain, the weight of evidence clouding judgment. For a moment, the scene looked like reversal incarnate. Trump, once drowning, now clawed his way back to the surface on the raft of manufactured lies. He spread his arms wide, basking in the noise. This is why America loves me, because I expose the fakes. And tonight, Jasmine Crockett just got exposed. The applause from his loyalists thundered. It filled the chamber with the illusion of triumph, drowning out reason, smothering clarity. But Jasmine's silence was not weakness. It was calculation. She rested her palms on the desk, staring at the pile of supposed evidence. Her eyes traced the pages, the signatures, the highlighted numbers. She didn't flinch. Trump leaned closer, voice dripping with mockery. What's wrong, Jasmine? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe the cat found your receipts. Laughter rippled from his corner of allies, sharp and ugly. But still, Jasmine didn't bite. She inhaled, exhaled. And with that single act of composure, the cameras pivoted back toward her. The silence stretched, unbearable, like the breath before a verdict. And yet, Trump reveled in it. He thought he had her pinned, nailed to the wall by forged proof and public spectacle. America deserves the truth, he bellowed, slamming his palm onto the desk again. And the truth is, you're nothing but a liar in lipstick. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, roars. It was chaos all over again, but chaos with a different tilt. Jasmine sat, motionless, her hands folded, eyes locked on Trump's. There was no fear, no crumble, just patience. Because storms may shift, but they always circle back. And as Trump stood there, basking in what he believed was his triumphant reversal, few noticed the faintest smile flickering across Jasmine's lips. It wasn't defeat, it was strategy. She knew the trap he had just set, and she knew the trap he had just walked into himself. The game was not over. It had only sharpened its teeth. Jasmine Crockett leaned back in her chair, lips curving into a smile so cold it could freeze fire. It wasn't amusement. It wasn't relief. It was the quiet, deadly certainty of a hunter who had let her prey step into the snare. The chamber, still buzzing from Trump's theatrics, hushed when that smile appeared. Reporters leaned forward. The cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker of steel in her eyes. She placed her hand gently on the stack of papers Trump had scattered like weapons across the desk. And then she spoke. "Do you think America is that stupid?" The words were soft, almost a whisper, but they cut through the roar like glass through flesh. Trump froze. The audience leaned closer. Even the moderator lowered the gavel midair, sensing the shift. Jasmine lifted the top page and held it to the light. "Because if you do, Mr. President, then you've just insulted every person in this room." Her finger tapped the corner of the sheet, a circled number scrawled in bold red ink. "This document you're waving, it's a fake. The signature? Copied. The seal? Blurred. And the numbers?" She shook her head, the faintest laugh in her throat. "They don't even match the Treasury database. Anyone with Wi-Fi could debunk this in 2 minutes." Gasps cracked through the audience. Trump's face twitched. "That's a lie, that's—" But Jasmine didn't stop. She grabbed another page, slapping it flat against the desk. "This one? Supposedly a record of my campaign donations, except—" She leaned closer, raising it toward the cameras. "The date on this transaction is from 3 months before I even announced my campaign. A ghost check, Mr. President. Proof of corruption or proof of your desperation." Applause exploded, fierce and sudden, rattling the chamber walls. Trump's hand slammed down. "Fake! She's lying! You're lying, you pathetic witch!" Jasmine didn't flinch. She calmly slid the paper back into the pile, then lifted the last page. Trump's supposed smoking gun. A grainy photo, blurry, a shadow of 2 figures exchanging an envelope. She held it high. "This?" she asked, voice slicing through the uproar. "This is your masterpiece? A photograph so doctored, it looks like it was made in a high school Photoshop class?" The room erupted in laughter. Even some of Trump's own allies shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away from the screens replaying the image. Jasmine's voice hardened, cold and final. "You tried to bury me with lies. But lies rot fast, Mr. President. And tonight, they just rotted in your hands." The audience rose to its feet, applause thundering like a storm. Trump's face twisted, rage boiling over. He slammed both fists onto the desk, rattling the microphone until it squealed. "Shut up!" he roared, his voice cracking. "You don't know anything. You don't deserve to be here. You're nothing but a goddamn—" The slur that followed froze the chamber. Raw, vulgar, unfiltered. Even for Trump, it was a step into darkness too deep to excuse. Gasps tore through the air. Reporters jolted upright, cameras locked, fingers racing over keyboards. The moderator's gavel hammered furiously, but the sound drowned beneath the chaos. Half the audience booed in outrage, the other half erupted in stunned disbelief. Trump, chest heaving, eyes wild, stood like a man cornered by his own venom. The words still hung heavy in the air, poisonous and unforgettable. And Jasmine, still seated, still composed, leaned into her microphone with surgical calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said softly, her eyes never leaving Trump's, "that outburst tells you more than any document ever could." The crowd roared again, louder this time, as if the chamber itself wanted to swallow Trump whole. Jasmine stacked the false papers neatly, tapped them once against the desk, and slid them aside like garbage. Then she looked at him, steady, unshaken, victorious. "Truth doesn't need tricks, and tonight, your tricks just exposed you." The chamber erupted. Applause, shouts, stomping feet, a wave of energy rolling over the chaos. And for the first time, Donald Trump didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man unmasked. And Jasmine Crockett sat there, cold smile intact, as if the entire night had been building to this moment. The moment she flipped the table and left him choking on the ashes of his own lies. But Trump was not a man who could be buried quietly. He rose, shoulders heaving, face blazing crimson, the veins on his neck bulging like wires ready to snap. The chamber trembled. It was no longer a hearing, it was a battlefield. Trump leaned into his microphone, his voice cracking into a snarl. "You think you're clever, Jasmine? You think facts make you strong? You're nothing, nothing. Without me, you'd be a nobody, just another angry little voice whining in the dark." The insult landed like a slap across the chamber. Boos erupted from one side, cheers from the other. Jasmine didn't blink. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened, and when she answered, her words sliced like a blade. "You call me nobody because you fear what I am, a mirror, and when America looks into me, they see the reflection of everything you've tried to hide. The corruption, the cruelty, the cowardice." The chamber roared, applause detonating like thunder. Trump slammed his fist against the desk so hard the microphone squealed. "Cowardice? You dare call me a coward? I built this country back with my bare hands. I faced enemies you couldn't even name. And you—" Jasmine cut in, her voice rising, fierce and relentless. "You faced no one. You cowered behind walls, behind lies, behind the weight of your office. You didn't build this country, you bled it dry." The moderator's gavel pounded in vain. No one listened. The duel had consumed the room. Trump bellowed, spittle flying. "You're a liar, a fraud. You should be ashamed to even sit here." Jasmine stood, her body trembling, not with fear, but with fire. "I sit here because I was elected to stand for the people you abandoned. I sit here because truth does not kneel before bullies." Gasps, applause, shouts. It was no longer a hearing but a coliseum, and the two combatants were gladiators wielding nothing but their voices. Trump leaned so close to the mic it buzzed with distortion. "You think they love you? They laugh at you. They see a weak, bitter little woman clinging to scraps of relevance." The words were venom, but Jasmine parried with steel. "They laugh at you, Donald. They laughed when you promised greatness and delivered chaos. They laughed when you claimed victory and left only ruin. And tonight, they're not laughing at me. They're laughing at you." The audience erupted again, this time with laughter as well as applause. Trump's face darkened, his fury boiling into desperation. "You filthy liar! You don't know." "I know enough," Jasmine snapped, cutting across him with deadly precision. "I know the people who lost their homes, the children who went hungry, the soldiers who felt abandoned. Their stories are the truth, not your slogans. Their pain is the evidence, not your props." The applause shook the chamber. Trump roared back, his voice cracking, raw with fury. "Shut your damn mouth! You don't have the right—" Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low but clear, each word a dagger. "I have every right, and more than that, I have every fact." The crowd's reaction was seismic, reporters' pens scratching like sparks, cameras flashing as if capturing a war in real time. The two stood now, Trump towering, Jasmine unyielding, voices clashing like steel against steel. He hurled insults, vicious and personal. She hurled truths, brutal and undeniable. Every sentence left a mark. Every word was a wound. The air was thick, suffocating with tension. The chamber shook with boos, cheers, cries of disbelief. It was no longer debate, it was combat. Trump pounded the desk, his voice ragged. "You're nothing but a disgrace." Jasmine struck back instantly, her eyes blazing. "And you're nothing but a fraud hiding behind the tattered costume of power." Applause thundered again, this time drowning Trump's sputtered rage. He tried to shout over it, his voice breaking, vulgarities spilling from his mouth like shards of glass. "Damn liar, pathetic witch." But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. They were locked on Jasmine, standing tall, unshaken, her voice carrying over the chaos. "Every insult you scream only proves my point. You are afraid. Afraid of truth. Afraid of accountability. Afraid of me. And tonight, everyone sees it. The chamber erupted. Booming applause, stomping feet, the sound of history being carved into stone. Trump's fury was fire. Jasmine's voice was steel. And together they forged a battleground unlike anything America had seen before. A war of words that left blood on the floor, even if no blade had touched flesh. And as the echoes rang out, one thing was clear. This was no longer a hearing. This was war. But in every war, there comes a moment when one weapon shatters all others. Jasmine Crockett knew it. She had held back her sharpest blade, waiting, watching, letting Trump exhaust himself in rage. And now, as the chamber thundered with chaos, she reached for it. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, her eyes unflinching. "Enough noise," she said, her words cutting through the storm like a sudden silence before lightning. "Let's deal in facts." The room hushed, not completely, but enough. Reporters leaned forward, cameras whirred, allies and enemies alike narrowed their eyes. Jasmine lifted a folder from her desk, its edges marked with the gravity of what it contained. She didn't wave it. She didn't dramatize. She simply laid it open, each page like a drumbeat in the chamber. "Here," she said, her voice low but caring, "are the documents, signed, sealed, traced, not whispers, not speculation, proof." She slid one sheet forward, the camera zooming in instantly. "This," she continued, her tone sharpened to a point, "is your signature, Donald, on the deal that funneled taxpayer money into your private accounts. Money meant for disaster relief, rerouted into your empire. The ink is yours, the trail is yours, and the theft, it's undeniable." The words fell like an executioner's blade. For a moment, nothing moved. Not the audience, not the reporters, not even Trump himself. Silence hung in the chamber, thick and heavy. Trump's mouth opened, but no sound came. And then, like a cornered beast, he exploded. "Fake! Fake documents! You think you can throw lies at me and make them true? You think you can destroy me with forgeries? I'll tear them apart." His voice cracked, shrill, panicked. It wasn't the confident bellow of a man in control. It was the scream of a man whose armor had finally split. The chamber erupted, gasps, shouts. A tidal wave of disbelief and electricity surged through the air. Jasmine didn't flinch. She pressed forward. "These weren't dug out of rumor mills, Donald. They came from your own accountants, handed over under oath. Their testimonies are here. Their signatures are here. And their words match the paper trail perfectly." She turned to the cameras. "America deserves the truth. And tonight, you see it with your own eyes." The audience broke into applause, thunderous, relentless. Reporters shouted questions over each other, their voices a storm of urgency. But Trump was unraveling, his face red as fire, his body twitching with rage. He slammed the desk, the microphone screeching under the assault. "Lies! All of it lies! You! His voice faltered, collapsing into guttural rage. "You filthy witch! You're trying to bury me! You and your crooked friends!" Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady, cold, merciless. "No, Donald, you buried yourself. I'm only showing the world where the grave lies." The chamber detonated, gasps, cheers, the sound of history shifting beneath their feet. For the first time all night, Trump had no retort sharp enough, no bluster loud enough to drown her out. The evidence sat between them like a loaded gun, and it was pointed squarely at him. The cameras zoomed in on his face, contorted, sweating, eyes darting like an animal trapped in a cage. And America watched. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence now was louder than his screams. And those screams came raw, desperate, piercing. "You won't get away with this. You hear me? You won't. I'll burn this place to the ground before I let you win." Gasps ripped through the chamber. It was no longer politics. It was madness, naked and uncontained. Jasmine remained unmoved, standing tall, her hands resting on the evidence that had shattered him. Her presence was a pillar, his a collapse. The press exploded, questions flying, cameras flashing like lightning strikes. Every outlet, every journalist, every witness knew what had just happened. The fatal blow had landed, and it had come from Jasmine Crockett. Trump's roar filled the chamber, but it wasn't strength. It was the sound of something broken, the howl of a king stripped of his crown. And as the world watched, Jasmine's calm became the headline, her proof the story, and his rage the tragic epilogue to a battle he could not win. The silence that followed her final words was not emptiness. It was the sound of history settling into place. And then, Trump moved. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't commanding. It was the stagger of a man gutted in front of the world. His chair screeched against the floor as he shoved it back. His hands trembled, not from fear, he would admit, but from a fury so consuming it stripped him of control. He rose, face contorted, jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched like live wires beneath his skin. His chest heaved with every breath, a man trying to suck air into lungs already burning with fire. The crowd erupted. Some booed, some jeered, some shouted his name in blind defense. But all of them knew they had just witnessed a fall. Trump slammed a hand down on the desk one final time, the wood shuddering under the impact. "This isn't over," he barked, his voice cracking, less a declaration of war than the final cry of a man drowning. The words echoed, but they rang hollow, because everyone in the room knew it was over. He spun on his heel, his suit rumpled, his tie askew, sweat streaking his brow like the stains of battle lost. He stormed toward the doors, each step less steady than the last, his power slipping through his fingers like sand. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward to catch his last words. But there were no words, only mutters, curses, the snarling breath of a man unraveling in real time. And then he was gone. The heavy doors slammed shut behind him, the sound like the final gavel on his reign of noise. The chamber exhaled. All eyes turned to her. Jasmine Crockett. She did not gloat. She did not sneer. She stood unmoving, her back straight, her chin lifted just enough to tell the world that she had weathered the storm and stood victorious. The light above seemed to bend toward her, catching the edge of her hair, her eyes, her shoulders. She looked less like a politician and more like a monument, an emblem carved from defiance, standing tall in the ruins of chaos. Her hands rested on the stack of documents, the proof that had pierced the veil of lies. She tapped them once, gently, as if to remind the world, this is what wins. Not volume, not fury, not power screamed into microphones. Truth. The audience rose, a wave of movement, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. Reporters fired questions. Flashes burst like lightning. But Jasmine didn't rush to answer. She let the noise wash over her. She let the victory breathe. Because this wasn't just her triumph, it was history's. One journalist shouted above the others, "Representative Crockett, what do you call tonight?" She paused, her lips curving just slightly, her eyes hard with resolve. "I call it justice." The word detonated in the chamber. Simple, sharp, unforgettable. Outside, the night pulsed with frenzy. Screens lit up with headlines, hashtags exploded, every network replayed the moment Trump fled, and Jasmine stood her ground. Clips raced across social media at light speed, voices arguing, praising, condemning, dissecting, but none of it changed the truth. The hearing, the battle, the showdown, the chui the key had ended, and only one figure remained untarnished in its wake. Trump, somewhere behind closed doors, was no doubt tearing apart whatever room he had retreated to, his rage afire with no fuel left to burn. His legacy, already cracked, now bled in full view. Jasmine, meanwhile, walked slowly from the chamber, flanked by cameras, her every step measured, deliberate. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. She allowed the world to see her, to record her, to remember her as she was in this moment, the woman who had stared down the storm and left unshaken. The final image burned itself into memory. Trump's empty seat, abandoned in fury. Jasmine Crockett, standing in light, documents in hand. The battlefield of words now silent, but the echoes immortal. And as the night closed, one truth spread across every corner of conversation. This wasn't just a political clash. It wasn't just an argument. It was a war of words that had scorched itself into history. The verbal duel of the century, and they called it. The night a man once untouchable was undone. Not by force, not by violence, but by a voice that refused to break. And when the dust finally settled, when the headlines began to crystallize, one line stood tallest among them all. Jasmine Crockett stood. Donald Trump fell. The echoes of that truth will not fade tomorrow, or next week, or next year. They will live, a permanent scar on the legacy of one man, and a blazing torch in the rise of another. And so, as the world replayed the footage, dissected the evidence, debated the meaning, one reality could not be denied. The hearing was over. The war was over. But the memory, the fire, the legend of the night Jasmine Crockett broke Donald Trump, that would burn forever. In the end, it was never about the volume of a man's rage, but the strength of a woman's truth. Jasmine Crockett proved that justice does not need fists or fury. It only needs the courage to speak when silence is easier. The lesson lingers. Power may shout, but integrity outlasts the noise. And if we choose to stand firm, even in the face of intimidation, we too can become guardians of what is right. Reminders that the light of truth burns longer than the shadow of lies. If this clash shook you, don't look away. Remember it. Share it. Talk about it. Send it to someone who still believes justice can't shout louder than lies. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where every voice for truth finds an echo. Hit the bell, because the next storm is already rising. It's fierce, and it will test what you believe about power. This was a fictional dramatization, drawn from the shadows of real injustice and the fire of real resistance. Any likeness to actual figures is coincidental, or symbolic, meant for reflection, critique, and conversation. Thank you for watching. Justice doesn't whisper, it roars. This is Harrison Stories.